All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Joe Swick. We're at Medici Vineyard in Newburgh. It's June 25th, 2020. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
First question, biggest question, why wine?
Wine was not something that I grew up with. It found me. It found me in the form of a retail job at a natural food store, that being Whole Foods Market. Back in the day, 20 years ago, kind of before they became a little more advanced in what they are now. And I was going to school, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I still don't know, actually. And I was working the sales floor at that Whole Foods and got to meet a lot of winemakers who at the time were self-distributing and dropping off their orders. Andrew Rich, Jay Summers, John Paul Cameron, off the top of my head, David O'Reilly of Owen Rowe, Peter Rosbach, who used to make wine here, Chenin. So it all started through a job at a natural food store. So I've had two jobs in my life. I've worked in natural food stores. When I went to Beaverton High School, when I was in high school, I was bagging groceries at Nature's, what is now New Seasons. And yeah, so I've only had two jobs. Worked in health food stores and in wineries doing cellar work. And here I am 20 years later.
So you grew up in Oregon, obviously, family's been here for a while. Did you have any concept of Oregon having a wine industry as you were growing up?
Not really. I knew that we grew Pinot Noir here, but alcohol wasn't really, my parents didn't drink wine and it wasn't a part of our lives, so I didn't actually taste wine until I was legally allowed to do so.
So as you're working at the grocery store and you're meeting these winemakers, what appealed to you about the job, and what appealed to you about the product itself?
The craft, the fact that these producers were doing everything with their craft, with their product, the thing they were producing. It seemed like it was very artisanal and very sincere. And keep in mind this was around the year 2000, 2001, and it just seemed like a really honest job and a way to be creative.
So as you kind of discovered your interest in it, tell me what the next steps were in actually getting into the industry.
So at that time, when I was working at Whole Foods, I was working a few different jobs around the store. I'd cashier sometimes. I'd work on the wine floor, selling wines retail, and tasting wines at that time too. And then once in a while, I would work in the shipping and receiving in the back of the store, and I learned how to drive a forklift, which is a very important skill to have working in the cellar. Being a winemaker, you have to learn to be a good forklift driver. And so started talking with David O'Reilly. I was a big fan of his wines when I first started tasting wines. My evolution with wine started with bigger, jammy, over-the-top, extracted, higher alcohol wines with a nice dollop of oak on them. And at that time, at least, those wines were very fashionable. And I was a big fan of David O'Reilly's wines. I still am. And he offered me an internship when he was about at the level that I am right now, around 5,000 cases per year production. And I was his one intern for 2003, and that was my first cellar job. And the rest is kind of history after that. That's when it started.
What were your first impressions of that part of the industry, of working in the cellar?
My first impressions were that it was very physical work. It was very not very glamorous. I thought that I would be involved with the wine a lot more. I thought that I would be tasting wines and be more involved with the winemaker. But a lot of what winery work is doing the same thing over and over again, and cleaning. And so that first harvest was basically just me cleaning everything and getting ready for the winery to receive grapes and getting ready for fermentation. And it was a lot of long hours, And I liked that. I like the abuse of that, and I still do. I still love harvest as much as physically, psychologically, emotionally, it really drains me. I still love it every year. I love doing it.
See, it's interesting to describe the job that way, and yet still like long hours, unglamorous, away from the product, and yet still be attracted to it. So, could you kind of see on the horizon like what you'd be doing in the future, like what it would lead to, and what maybe like what you're doing now? I mean, did you just kind of have that notion of like, if I work this out, this is what will happen in the future, and I can do this myself, or were you still kind of finding yourself at that point?
I was definitely still finding myself. Cellar work, some people get it right away, some people don't. I was definitely not a person that got it right away. I got into wine through tasting, and at that point, I didn't know that I wanted to get into wine production. I knew that I wanted to be involved with wine. I knew at that point that's what I wanted to do as a career. But wine cellar work, wine production didn't come to me right away. One of many dogs here. And during that time, I was also taking classes at Shemeketa, and had a few really good teachers there at the time. I don't think they're there anymore, but Barney from Tyee, Rick Maffitt from Mystic, a gentleman who owned Seven Springs Vineyard,
Al McDonald.
And so that and my first few internships were kind of where I was feeling it out, and it took me a while to really decide that production was where I wanted to go. At the beginning, it was more, I was thinking maybe I'd want to be a somm. I don't think that would have worked out, but yeah.
Do you remember, was there a moment, or was there a harvest, or was there a season where that kind of clicked in and production became the goal, and you sort of set you off down that path?
Yeah, I think it took me about year 8 of, so I did a lot of internships. I didn't have a really permanent job in the wine industry until about 10 years after I'd started interning. So I did 15 harvests all around the world in 10 years. So I was going back and forth between Australia and New Zealand, and the Northern Hemisphere, Oregon or California. So I did kind of go the academic route a little bit just to get a good base, but for the most part, my schooling in wine has been through the school of hard knocks. And I'd say it was probably 2010, working in the Douro Valley with Newport, was where I had really decided that's what I wanted to do, wine production. And but at that point, I never thought that I would be able to be doing what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
So before we get to what you're doing now, let's talk about that. 15 harvests in 10 years, that's quite a journey, travel and a lot of work. What did you kind of learn about yourself along the way, and what did you kind of learn about, what did you kind of take with you from those various experiences?
What I took from all of them was work experience, working with different types, different personalities, shy people, very outgoing people, people that were very grumpy. And I got to see a lot of people make mistakes in the winery that I ended up not making by myself. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I took away from working so many harvests is when I was ready to make my own wines, I felt very, very confident doing so because I'd seen so many people and been inspired by so many people with the way they thought, their technique. But I'd also seen winemakers make the mistakes in the cellar that I didn't.
What about the obviously different regions and different, obviously very different, everything about those industries is quite different from Australia, New Zealand, California, Oregon. Were there, what brought you back to Oregon? Was there ever a thought of making wine somewhere else? Was there ever, were you ever intrigued by staying in New Zealand permanently or California permanently?
Let's see. No, Australia and New Zealand, no. The industry there, working in a winery, it requires a lot more on the academic side for you to be a winemaker. Less so on the practical skills. And to me, it seemed a lot more industrial. It felt like I was working in a factory. I had high-vis vests on all the time. I had a hard hat. I went through 2 or 3 weeks of training about safety procedures and stuff like that. And unless I was able to start my own thing there, which I think with customs, and I don't think it was really very feasible. So the reason that I chose Oregon, I had a choice between France and Oregon. I was married to a French woman for a while, and we had to choose between staying in France and in Southwest France, where she's from, and moving to Oregon. And at the time, we were thinking Bordeaux because she had a job offer there, and I just couldn't see myself with not speaking French and being an American trying to come over and make wine in Bordeaux. And I also didn't have the finances to be able to do that as well. So I'm from Oregon. I'm a 5th generation Oregonian. Both sides of my family are from Eastern Oregon, the Dalles. And this is home. And I saw a lot of opportunity, especially at the time, about 10 years ago, the Columbia Gorge was just kind of starting to really take off. And so initially my first thought was to make wines for the Columbia Gorge exclusively. But I wanted to get organic grapes, and it was really hard at that time to find organic vineyards up in the Columbia Gorge. So my first vintage was 2013, and I started off with 2 Pinot Noirs, one from the Washington side of the Columbia Gorge, and then one from Yamhill Carlton.
So tell me about starting your own thing. You've obviously been in it a long time, like you said, a lot of learning and a lot of developing. So when you went to start, did you have a pretty good notion of what your brand was going to be, what your winemaking style was going to be? Did you have kind of an idea what you wanted to put out into the world?
Yeah, I did. When I was married, I spent a lot of time in France tasting, and I'd never heard of. I think they call them vin naturel or vin nature, but natural wines. I'd heard of them, but I hadn't really tasted them. And through my time in France, I was exposed to those type of wines, and those were the type of wines that really spoke to me. And I thought that with all of my experience prior to that, I could take that risk. Making those kind of wines is a little bit more risky than taking a more hands-on approach. And so, my goal when I first started was to try to make wines that are as close to just being grapes as possible, while still having them taste like wine and not like kombucha or something else. Yeah.
Grape juice.
Yeah. A lot of the natural wines, quote unquote. I wish there were another way to describe those wines, but the flavor profiles are all over the board. Some of them taste like vinegar, some taste like kombucha, some taste like wine. You don't even know that they're without sulfur and without any filtration and all that stuff. But from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to make naked wines.
That's pretty early for the natural wine. Natural wine is 2013. That era was not very common.
Yeah. And
you're also looking for organic grapes, a little bit ahead of the curve too. So tell me about why both those things were so important to you.
Through my travels, like I explained before, being in France, being exposed to natural wines, and then I had a chance meeting at a house party in 2008 or 2009 with Alice Firing, who's a natural wine author, expert, and she tasted me on 2 of my first natural wines. They were Couturier Carignan and an Arnott Roberts Syrah, and that was kind of when that opened the book for me for natural wines. But it just seemed like it clicked with me. I really like simplicity. I like purity. I like wines that taste like they're alive, and that maybe sometimes are not analytically correct, but are beautifully flawed, if you want to call those flaws.
It's like you say, a risky way to make wine. Tell me about the confidence level to put a product like that out, knowing that it could be flawed or it's going to be trickier for you. You're going to have less tools, and coming right out with it. Was it harder in the early days? Did you have to convince yourself or convince others that it was the right thing to do?
I did. I went through kind of an evolution of that. But I was just doing it by taste, and so as long as I was happy with it, and I've tasted, I think, enough wines that I know what I hit a certain threshold where it might not be something that I feel I can back up or put out there. Like 2015 was a very warm year in Oregon, one of the warmest. I mean, we've had a lot of warm years lately, but for me, 2015 was one of the warmest years, and I really got into the whole no sulfur thing. And so 2015, I decided I was going to make all my wines with 0 sulfur added to them, just organic grapes, and that's it. And I made some of my favorite wines that year, and some wines that that are not my favorites. 2 that I probably now would not have released, and they were interesting, but they were just a little bit too wacky. So then in 2016, I kind of dialed it back a bit and started using just a little bit of sulfur right before bottling, like 5 to 10 parts per million, and just enough to keep the wine stable in bottle. And since then, I found that method has worked for me, and so that's kind of how I keep it now. Just a little bit of sulfur, and that's it.
Tell me about the logistics of starting your own label. You have to find grapes. You have to find a place to make your wine. You have to name yourself and design a label and all of that stuff. So tell me about the actual logistics of finding all of those things as you're getting started.
A lot of it's word of mouth. So if like the Yakima Vineyards, I'd known about since the beginning, since Owen Rowe. So I'd kind of already been in this circle, and then. After all my internships, and I came back here to Oregon, I started working a few cellar jobs, permanent jobs, while I was getting things started. I worked for, and just through meeting people, like Chris Berg, for example, from Roots, introduced me to Ken Kinsella, who is my main Pinot Noir vineyard that I still have now. So it's just being in the industry. As far as fruit sources, doing a little bit of research. If you really want organic grapes, those can be hard to come by. Even more in Yakima, up in Washington, it's just not really. They're not really doing that up there much. And then I think I kind of got lucky too. I was in the right place at the right time. We were kind of coming out of the whole Pinot Noir sideways thing, and I got my wines in front of some well-known tasters or sommeliers in New York City, and it kind of just grew from there. I didn't have a lot of help. I kind of chose to do everything myself. I had a lot of good mentors. Starting something without any financing was definitely one of the biggest parts. I think that's one thing that differentiates myself from some of my colleagues. And that, I mean, I started from Whole Foods wages and my savings from working harvests. My first year was 8 barrels of wine. It's about 200 cases. And so logistically, I don't even know really how I did it, other than I did everything myself. Yeah.
So for most people, the hardest part of that is actually selling the wine and getting the wine. You mentioned New York City. Before the interview, we were talking about Los Angeles. Tell me about learning to sell your wine and learning to put your own product out there into the marketplace.
Being present, I chose to put my last name on my wines or on my business, which I'm not sure if that was the smartest move, because now I'm the face of the company and I'm only one person, and if I ever want to sell, I don't think I will, but if I ever want to sell my business, it has my name attached to it. But eventually I kind of, I wanted my wines to be about the Pacific Northwest, not just, because my wines are from Oregon and Washington. And I was kind of at the start or maybe the second generation of some of the natural wine movement. So I think I kind of was into that a little bit earlier than some other people. I don't know. I think I got lucky. I don't know if I can give myself too much credit. I worked really hard. I went out in the market and hustled and was present. And yeah.
Kind of like the question for winemaking, was there a moment when you felt like the business was going to succeed? Was there a sale you made or a contract you had that made it feel like this is sustainable, I can do this? Yeah,
New York City. So that's what kind of helped me launch. And I went through a couple of distributors, and that's really the only time I've had to switch distributors was in New York City. This has kind of always been a hot topic and not something that a lot of winemakers choose to make public, but I've been vocal about it, and that more often than not, working with distributors, you're really rolling the dice as far as whether or not you're going to get paid for the product that you work so hard to make. And I went through that pretty hard and had some really good life lessons with that. And so it was my third distributor. I broke up with two distributors, and then I found my current distributor is Jenny and Francois, and they're kind of some of the maybe not the first, but one of the first natural wine distributors in New York City, who was only promoting natural wines. There are a lot of distributors that have a little section of, within there, but Jenny and Francois. And so signing on with Jenny and Francois really helped me jump to the next level. And that would have been 2015 or 16. And I've had a lot of good momentum with them since then. And then that's opened up a lot of doors throughout, a lot of channels throughout the rest of the country as far as distribution. So tell me about the evolution of your product. You started with two Pinots. Since then, what have you expanded to make variety-wise and style-wise? And do you have plans on more in the future? Yeah, started out with Pinot. That was my plan, was to really, that's kind of what we do here, And then I saw the writing on the wall, being present and being in markets. And the writing on the wall was that at least that market is oversaturated with Oregon Pinot Noir. And Oregon Pinot Noir at that time, and I think still now, has a reputation of being expensive. And I still can't and wasn't able to at that time, able to afford a $60 or $70 or $80 bottle of Pinot Noir. And I didn't want to go out and with a straight face try to sell an $80 Pinot Noir if I can't even afford to buy that myself. I think that's a lot of money to pay for something that you're going to pee out an hour or two later, I mean, it's $80. Expensive Pinot Noirs. I knew that I didn't want to do that, especially in this natural wine niche. And I can't compete with some of these producers who I've grown up loving because they're already established. Josh Bergstrom, for example, I grew up really liking his Pinot Noirs, or Archery Summit or Domaine Serene. All these people, these brands, wineries, have been making Pinot Noirs for 2 decades before I started. And I love Pinot Noir. I love Oregon, but I wanted to put out something that wasn't Pinot Noir out there and kind of show a different side of the Pacific Northwest. And so 2014, my next year, I made a little bit of Grenache. What else did I make? I made a Pinot Gris, like a skin contact Pinot Gris, Ramato style. And then eventually started getting into Washington, and then Washington, there's a whole laundry list of grape varieties to pick from there. Finding them organically grown is really hard, but I found a handful of vineyards up there who were all managed by my vineyard manager up there, Phil Klein. Phil Klein started the Natchez Heights AVA in Washington, and that's an AVA that's focused on sustainable farming. So to be with, to have that AVA attached, I think, to your brand, you have, or your vineyard at least, you have to abide by a certain list of rules. But I think it's at a very minimum being live certified. Most of the vineyards in that AVA are organic, practicing or certified, or even biodynamic. There's a few up there. So in those vineyards, I've got Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French grape varieties. So all the Bordeaux grape varieties to choose from, the Rhones, some Spanish, Touriga Nacional, Portuguese grape that I love, Verdelho. So I had a lot of a mix of grape varieties to choose from, and that's kind of where I found where I am now. I make about 20 different grape varieties. Some of them blended, some of them co-fermented, some red and whites, and then I do a lot of single grape varieties as well.
Have you had any difficulty introducing some of those to a market when people are not familiar with the grape or not familiar with the region?
I have, especially at first when I was getting started, when my brand was growing. Now people are a lot more open-minded to these grape varieties because they're coming from my brand. Cunoise, for example, is a grape variety I've worked with for several years. Cinsault, Verdelho from Portugal, Touriga Nacional, like I said before, Graciano from Spain. A lot of people who are tasting these wines, it's their first time ever tasting them, and they're very curious and open-minded. And I think that's a change that I've seen in the market with consumers, is that it seems like consumers are a lot more open-minded about trying new things, new grape varieties. They're not just set on, I only drink Chardonnay, or all Syrah tastes like Australian Shiraz, or Cabs, I only drink Cab, that kind of thing. I think at least my customers, they're very open-minded to trying new things. And I think a lot of wine drinkers now are a lot more educated than they were 15, 20 years ago.
So you mentioned the difficulty of finding organic vineyards for some of the grapes you're interested in. As you find vineyards that you're interested in, tell me about sort of developing those relationships with owners and kind of finding places you like and sort of the expectations you have for the grapes. I mean, how do you balance like what the grower wants to do with what you want to make?
Most of the growers that I work with were already working organic from the beginning. So I'm looking at consistency and the relationship with them. For those growers, I have had a few growers that were right on the cusp of being organic, and it was basically just one herbicide spray away from practicing organic. And for me, herbicide use is kind of the threshold about my vineyard sources. But it was finding a way that made the deal, the relationship between us, sustainable for them as a business. And there were some growers that tried it out and it didn't work for them, for their site, and I totally understand that. For example, I've had two Malone de Bourgogne vineyards, one in Umpqua and one in the Willamette Valley in Yamhill Carlton. who were moving in the direction of organic and then decided it wasn't for them. And, I totally understand that. And for me, I've had to stop buying those grapes in those situations, but the feeling was, amicable. And there have been a few growers who, as long as I paid my bills on time and I took a certain amount of the vineyard, or all the vineyard, let's say, they were willing to work organic.
Has it gotten easier finding organic grapes that you are interested in?
It has. I've seen over the last 5 years a lot of vineyards, especially up in Washington, deciding that that herbicides aren't needed, and that it's actually much easier to grow organic produce up there than it is down here because of the disease pressure. And specifically in the Natchez Heights AVA, or the area that I get my grapes from, it's at about 1,800 feet elevation, where a lot of the rest of the valley, as far as I know, is down kind of around 500 to 700-ish. And so a big swing, different climate change, temperatures and disease pressure. So no, I've seen a lot of people in the Columbia Valley moving towards organic produce, organic grapes.
Let's talk about your winemaking space a little bit. We're here at Medici, obviously a shared space, kind of a co-op space. So tell us about finding this as your winemaking place and about working with other people in a space like this.
Yeah, so I've been here on and off since 2004. I worked my second harvest here for Peter Rosbach of Shanann. And this has always been kind of like a second home to me. I've kept in touch with Hal. And for Memorial Day weekend and Thanksgiving weekend, I'd always take my mom out to come out and taste, and this is one of the places that we'd come. And so I kind of circled back around in the end of 2012, 2013, I think, the beginning of 2013. Peter Rosbach had outgrown this space and reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to come and make wines for Hal Medici and make wines out of this space because he was leaving. And so it just kind of, the right thing happened at the right time. And I moved in here and didn't end up making wines for Hal because Hal decided he didn't want to make wines anymore. He just wanted to grow grapes. But I started my own thing here. And so that's kind of how I found Medici, was through Shanann.
What about balancing your needs with other people making wine on the similar schedule to you in the same space?
Yeah, so when I was making 200 cases of wine or 500, 1,000 cases, and we didn't have as many tenants at that time too, so we had a lot of space to work with. And so I was working for Roots Winery here, and then when his work was done for the day, I'd clock off with him and then do my own thing. So it was pretty easy at that time. However, now I've been growing since then, and Timothy Malone, we've all been growing since we moved in. We have Timothy Malone and Sheba Wishern are the two other tenants here right now. And we have the facility kind of maxed out right now. And I make the most out of all three of us, but we all make a fair amount of wine. So there isn't a mediator here, so it's kind of everyone fends for themselves. And that can make it tough at times, especially during harvest. But we just keep in good communication, try to be flexible with each other, and communicate through like a Google Calendar. And if someone's bottling in the tank room, we know that we're not able to work that day, or if Sheba Wisher and they like to use gravity instead of pumps, so they need a forklift to do that, and that means that the forklift is out of commission for 3 days. So we communicate through text or through Google Calendar, and it all works out pretty well. We all get along. We all do our own thing. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you obviously grown and you're maxing out the space now. So do you have, as you sort of look ahead to the future for yourself, is it going to be here? Or are you gonna have to find a new space? Do you have like future plans for yourself and the brand?
Yeah, I can't grow much anymore with the other two tenants here. So I'm kind of, for the time being, I'm kind of stuck where I am. I'm not sure what the next few years will hold. It kind of just depends on what Hal has in mind, or the other two tenants. But I could see myself relocating to the Columbia Gorge. I've been looking for property there for the last couple of years to plant my own vines. And I really love it there. That's where my mom and dad are from. I could see myself relocating there, but I really like it down here. I like the proximity to Portland. So I'm kind of torn between somewhere in the Newburgh area. If I could find something industrial between here and Portland. Parrot Mountain I like. The Chehalem Mountains I like a lot. But if I have to stay here for the next 4 or 5 years, I'm fine with it, because making a move kind of seems a little bit stressful right now.
If you did have property and were planting vines, what would you plant?
If I was in a colder part of the Columbia Gorge, like Underwood or Hood River, I would probably go for a little bit more cool climate grape varieties. I really like Aligoté a lot. I like Chenin Blanc, Gamay Noir, some of the Jura grape varieties, Pulsard, Trousseau, Sauvignon. Kind of like some of the a little bit more obscure cool climate grape varieties. So not Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I'm a big fan of Gewürztraminer. I make some orange Gewürztraminer. I think I'd like to plant some more of that. A lot of Gewürztraminer around the Willamette Valley, I think, is being crafted up or ripped up at the moment, and crafted over to other stuff. Pinot Gris as well, actually. I love Pinot Gris too. And then if I was in the Dalles, let's say, for example, the shift is completely, you go from the Hood River to the Dalles, it's green to orange as far as aesthetically. And so if I were there, I'd be doing Grenache. I'd probably be doing Rhone grape varieties, Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah, Grenache Blanc.
So we're in June 2020. Obviously, we're dealing with the pandemic here still, and I'm curious how that has affected your business and your kind of current outlook and sort of future outlook for Swick Wines.
Yeah, I've had to really get dialed in on DT, direct to customer sales, and social media. And I think I've done a good job with social media. I haven't really had a lot of experience up until now with direct to customer, so I've had to change that. I need to get a decent website up and running. I don't know if you've checked out my website, but it's not really happening at the moment. And people really want to buy wines, and people are drinking wines still at home, doing what they do. And so I've shifted a lot of my business over to direct to consumer sales, and I've been doing kind of wine club type 6-pack deals. Most of my distributors deal with restaurants. I'd say about 80%. So outside of the bigger markets, New York and California, I took a hit with the smaller markets because they're smaller markets, and most of them are working with mostly restaurants. So I haven't seen a change really in total sales. I haven't seen a drop off, but I'd say that I'm working a lot differently than I was before. And like I was saying before, with travel, I'm not really able to travel and go out and work the market right now. And so I'm just down at my house down the road, down by I live down by J. Christopher, kind of Kingsgrade Road down there. And so, yeah, this is like pretty close to. Even before the pandemic, I was pretty self-quarantined. Other than I was traveling a lot, but when I'm here in Oregon, it's all work. I'm here at the winery and work a full day, usually 7 days a week, and then I go home and just repeat it over and over again. So in that regard, nothing's really changed. But it's given me a lot more time to be present and to go up to Yakima and be present in the vineyards up there. That was something that I was missing before because I was so busy, and now I'd say I'm up there every 2 or 3 weeks, just looking at the progress of things. And yeah, I've had a lot more time just to be here.
Does that change what you think about going forward? Is the business model going to change for good? Is your travel schedule going to change for good, or are you kind of itching to get back to that?
No, definitely not itching to get back to that. I was very burnt out. I think St. Patrick's Day, I was still traveling, and that was really when the stuff was hitting the fan as far as the pandemic. But I put in a lot of the groundwork and really hustled for 4 years. 2015 through 2019, I was on the road a lot. And I think that set me up for what's going on now. And when things get better, no, I don't think I'll be doing that like I used to. I think I might go and maybe do an annual portfolio tasting in New York with my distributor, with Jenny and Francois there, or I'll go and do a couple natural wine fairs, like the Raw Natural Wine Fair that happens every year. But the constant market visits, I probably won't do, or I don't think I need to do them anymore. I think I put in that work. So, yeah.
So you've been around the Oregon wine industry for a while now. Tell me what the biggest changes are from when you got into Oregon wine to now. What is the biggest industry difference between then and now?
I've seen a lot of producers who are focused on higher priced Pinot Noirs, making a Willamette Valley AVA wine. I've seen a lot of the younger generation of winemakers exploring outside of Pinot Noir, and kind of doing what I've been doing. I think a lot of winemakers, I think, don't like being out on the road, and it can get pretty tedious at times. I liked it. I liked that rush, flying all the time and doing events and staying in hotels and meeting new people and all that, but that got old after a while. So yeah, biggest changes since when I started. I'd say just the focus on marketing and what people are doing with their branding, and I think that, like I was saying before, I think Pinot Noir, single vineyard Pinot Noirs, I think people are moving away from that and going for more of a more approachable price point for a Pinot Noir. Selling more Chardonnay. I think a lot of producers are making a lot more Chardonnays now. Oregon Chardonnays have had a lot of traction. And then, yeah, trying new grape varieties that aren't really known in Oregon.
And what about the future for Oregon wine? What do you see the next decade for Oregon wine looking like?
I think the people will probably diversify as far as grape varieties. I think that I think tourism, I think we had a good momentum of tourism going with tasting rooms and people coming to Oregon or the Pacific Northwest to experience everything that we have here, including wines. And I think once things get back to normal, I think we're going to see a huge boom of tourism, and people are just finding out about the way of life here. We have a pretty cool thing here happening in Portland, and it's been a secret for a while, and I think the secret got out a little while ago, but I think it'll be different than Sonoma or Napa or some of the other wine regions that people are that have been more well known than Oregon, but I think it's going to be a destination.
Something you said about selling wine made me think of a question I wanted to ask you earlier that I'd forgotten, but you mentioned kind of the rush of being on the road and of selling wine, putting your wine in front of people, and I'm curious about developing the thick skin you have to have. Excuse me. Second, get that book out of my nose. I'm curious about developing the sort of thick skin you need to have to put, especially a natural wine, in front of people. And it might be something that they don't expect, they've never had before, a variety they haven't had. Tell me about putting your first wines out in the marketplace and maybe how you've evolved as a seller since then.
It can be hard when people critique what you work so hard for. Sorry,
It's all good.
that wasn't me. Having honest criticism from people can be hard, especially with natural wines, because if you're talking to somms or winemakers who don't like natural wines, and there's definitely a strong opinion against natural wines from some winemakers, you will get a lot of criticism. I've just learned to roll with it and not let it bother me. And it's made me work harder in the cellar. I think that making hands-off wines is kind of counterintuitive. You do have to work harder to make them, because you're letting it all hang out. It's all you're dangling on the edge of a cliff, and you don't know what's going to happen. With conventional wines, you have more safety. You have other things that you're able to add and subtract and look at numbers and to make the wine go in a certain direction. You're not letting whatever happens happen. And so you know what you're going to get. And you're making more of a food product. It's more like making it's a recipe. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to recreate a Snickers bar, or some of the Chardonnays maybe you taste down in Napa or Sonoma that have a reputation of being a Chardonnay that everyone likes. They like to have consistency. They want it to taste the same every year. But with natural wines and with Oregon, with our climate, that's one of the fun things that I enjoy about being in Oregon, is that every vintage is different and you get vintage variation. I want to circle back around to your question, though. Let's see. How have things changed since?
I'm curious about just you as a salesperson. You have your name on the label. You're taking your wine out to market. You're getting criticism. You're dealing with it, and now how that's sort of changed to now, how you've sort of developed the skills and the thick skin.
I guess I just don't care what other people think anymore, because I'm not out critiquing anyone else's wines or being catty or backstabby or talking down about other winemakers for whatever they do with their own craft. That's what they choose for their own wines, and that's how they want to make their own wines, and I think that's great. And I wouldn't consider myself a phenomenal winemaker. I think I'm really good at making the wines that I make, though. At my own style of wines. Now, whether or not those are everyone's cup of tea, I don't know. But the thing that has been kind of a justification, I guess, for me, is the fact that I've grown very fast. So obviously, I'm striking a chord with someone out there. Maybe not with the people who don't like my wines or what I'm doing, or say that what I'm doing is bad or whatever, but people are excited about it. So what it's been is just believing in myself and not listening to what other people say. Yeah.
So if someone were to come to you and say they wanted to join the Oregon wine industry tomorrow, what would your words of wisdom to them be?
Believe in yourself. Don't don't try to ride coattails. Make sure that you're financially able to succeed or to grow. And plan and prepare. Work a few harvests. Make mistakes. Or see other winemakers make mistakes when you're interning, and then learn from what they did wrong, or learn from what they did right if you get inspired by someone else. Yeah, and just not second guess yourself. Just believe in yourself.
I like it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
No, not that I can think of. No.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time, for your thoughts and your stories here today, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thank you.